The hall was buzzing softly with voices, the kind of gentle hum that fills a room just before something is about to begin. People were moving around, greeting friends, adjusting their seats, and looking over the program for the evening. It was a charity event, one that promised music and entertainment, and the crowd seemed full of excitement. Most of them wore neat clothes, smiling and chatting as though they belonged in that place. While others looked around with curiosity, in the midst of all this, an old nun walked slowly through the entrance, carrying herself with a quiet dignity that immediately made her stand out, though no one paid much attention to her at first. Her habit was simple and plain, her hands folded in front of her, and her eyes carried a calmness that seemed to observe everything without ever judging it. She had come to the event not to be noticed, not to perform, but simply to support the cause and perhaps enjoy the music in her own quiet way. The moment she stepped in, she felt a mixture of nerves and warmth. Her steps were measured. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if she wanted to make sure she left no trace of disturbance, no unnecessary noise. She could hear the faint laughter of the people around her, the soft clinking of glasses from the refreshment table, and the distant sound of chairs scraping against the polished wooden floor. The hall was grand, with high ceilings, polished floors, and rows of chairs neatly lined up. At the front, a large, shiny piano stood alone under a spotlight. Its surface reflected the overhead lights like a mirror, and the keys seemed to wait patiently for someone to wake them up. The nun felt a familiar pang in her heart. When she looked at the piano, it had been years, decades, even since she had last touched one. She remembered the days when her fingers would glide over the keys, creating music that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Music had once been her closest companion, her language when words felt inadequate. She had poured her joy, her sadness, her hopes, and her fears into it. But life had led her down a different path, one of service and devotion, and the piano had become a memory. Now, standing in front of it, she felt a strange mixture of longing and hesitation. She moved quietly to the side, trying to find a seat at the back of the hall. People glanced at her politely, some with curiosity, others with mild disinterest. No one knew who she was, and no one expected anything from her. That was exactly how she wanted it. She wanted to blend in, to be invisible, to simply sit and listen. But as she passed the piano, her hand almost lifted instinctively toward it, as if drawn by a force she could not resist. She caught herself quickly, lowering her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. A young organizer noticed her lingering near the piano. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, approaching her with a smile. "This piano is reserved for the performers tonight. Are you here to watch the show?" The nun nodded gently. "Yes, I am here to support the event." "I hope the music is beautiful," he nodded, smiling. "I'm sure it will be. Please, let me show you to a seat." She followed him, walking slowly, every step deliberate. She found a seat near the back where she could see the piano but remain unobtrusive. As she sat down, she watched the performers moving on stage, tuning instruments, adjusting microphones, and testing sound levels. The excitement in the room was growing, but she remained calm, almost as if she were observing from a distance. Untouched by the nervous energy around her, the program began. And one by one, performers took the stage. There were young musicians, full of energy and confidence, and older ones, polished and experienced. The audience applauded politely, some with genuine enthusiasm, others with a polite smile. The nun listened quietly, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes occasionally glancing at the piano. Every now and then, she caught herself imagining what it would feel like to sit down and play, to feel the keys beneath her fingers again. She pushed the thought away, reminding herself that she was just a guest here. Still, part of her could not ignore the piano. It seemed to call to her, whispering memories she had almost forgotten. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the long nights when music had been her solace, the way her heart had soared when she mastered a difficult piece. The memories were vivid, almost tangible, and for a moment she felt the old excitement rise within her. She looked around to make sure no one was paying attention, then allowed her fingers to hover just above the keys. Before she could touch them, a young volunteer walked by. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am," he said cheerfully. "The performers need the piano. You can't play tonight." The nun smiled gently, hiding her disappointment. "Of course," she said softly. "I understand." She moved back to her seat, keeping her hand close to herself. Her heart beat a little faster than usual, and she felt a strange mix of longing and restraint. She reminded herself why she had come to enjoy the music, to support the event, to be a part of the audience, nothing more. And yet every time she looked at the piano, a tiny spark of desire flickered in her chest. As the performances continued, she found herself drawn into the music. Tapping her fingers lightly against her knees in rhythm, letting the melodies wash over her, she noticed the audience, how they responded, how some were genuinely moved, while others seemed distracted. She saw the young performers, their nervous energy, the way they trembled slightly before starting, the way their faces lit up when the first notes rang out. She understood that feeling all too well. It was a mixture of fear and excitement, of vulnerability and pride, the very essence of performing. During a brief intermission, she walked slowly toward the refreshment table, careful not to draw attention. She sipped a cup of tea and looked around the hall. Her eyes returned again and again to the piano. It was such a simple instrument, yet it held so much power. She remembered the first time she had learned to play, how the keys had felt cold and unfamiliar, how the music had slowly become an extension of her soul. She remembered the joy of mastering a difficult piece, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from nothing, and the way music had once been her language when words had failed. Even now, decades later, that memory was alive. The piano seemed to wait patiently for someone worthy, and she could feel the pull in her chest. The gentle insistence of something she had almost forgotten. She sat back in her seat, letting the sensation pass, reminding herself that she was here as a guest, not as a performer. But the pull lingered, like a soft whisper she could not ignore. The second half of the program began, and the music grew more complex, more emotional. She watched the performers, noticed their mistakes and triumphs, felt the tension in the room, and appreciated the beauty of the art unfolding before her. And still, she could not shake the feeling that she belonged on the other side of the piano, that she should be the one creating the music rather than just listening. She felt a connection to the audience as well. People laughed, clapped, and sometimes even teared up. She saw families, couples, and friends sharing the experience, feeling the music together. And in that shared experience, she realized something important. Music was not just about performance. It was about connection, about touching hearts, about creating something that could transcend age, experience, and expectation. She understood that even if she did not play, she was still part of that magic. Yet, when she looked at the piano again, the desire to play grew stronger. She remembered how music had always been a part of her life, how it had shaped her days, comforted her in sorrow, celebrated in joy. She felt the familiar thrill, the old excitement that had never truly faded. And she knew, deep down, that this night was different. Something was stirring, something beyond her understanding. Something that promised a possibility she could not yet name. The hall grew quieter as the next performer approached. Everyone turned their attention to the stage, clapping politely. The nun adjusted her seat, hands folded again, eyes fixed on the piano for just a moment longer. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and restraint. She reminded herself to be patient, to enjoy the music, to remain just another spectator. But as the soft notes began to play, she felt her heart beat a little faster, her mind racing with memories and possibilities. And though she did not know it yet, the night had already started to change. The piano, the music, the audience, and the quiet determination inside her were all moving toward a moment that would be unforgettable. She could feel it, a quiet certainty that something remarkable was about to happen, something that no one in the hall could predict, something that would not just touch hearts, but perhaps even transform them. She sat quietly, hands resting in her lap, eyes on the piano, and waited, knowing that the story was only beginning, and that the quiet arrival of an old nun had already set the stage for something extraordinary. The hall had settled into a quiet rhythm after the opening performances. People sipped their drinks, exchanged small talk, and laughed softly. The music lingered in the air like a delicate fragrance, leaving traces of emotion even after the notes had faded. The old nun sat in her seat near the back, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She listened with careful attention, but her mind had begun to wander, as it often did when she heard music that stirred old memories. She remembered the days when she was young, her fingers learning the piano keys one by one, her eyes scanning sheet music late into the night, her heart leaping with each chord she mastered. Those were long ago now. In a life that had felt full and vibrant, but it also demanded sacrifice, she had loved music with all her heart, yet the path she had chosen, a life of service, devotion, and simplicity, had required her to put it aside. She had buried her passion, thinking that the piano would be there when the time was right. But decades had passed, and she had convinced herself that her playing days were behind her. And yet here she was, standing at the edge of a memory, feeling the old excitement rise once more as she sat quietly. Her mind drifted back even further, to a small room in her youth, where the piano had stood against the wall. She had spent hours practicing, sometimes late into the night, her fingers aching, her eyes straining from reading the notes. Her parents had encouraged her at first, proud of her talent, but life had a way of pulling people in different directions. Responsibilities, expectations, and circumstances had led her to the convent, where she found peace and purpose and service, but where the piano had become a silent witness to a part of her life that she could never fully reclaim. Even now, the memory of those early years was vivid. She remembered the thrill of performing for small gatherings, the nervous excitement of playing in front of others, the pride in mastering a difficult piece, the quiet satisfaction of hearing music that came from within her soul. Music had been her companion in joy and in sorrow. It had been her voice when words were not enough. And now, decades later, standing in the hall with that grand piano before her, she felt the familiar pull once more, as if the instrument were calling her to remember who she truly was. She looked around the room. People were enjoying the performances, clapping politely, some with genuine enthusiasm, others with polite indifference. She noticed the young musicians, how they struggled with nerves, how their hands trembled slightly before they began, how their faces lit up when they played well. She understood that feeling all too well. She remembered the first time she had performed in front of an audience, how her heart had raced, how every note had felt like a test of her courage and skill, and how the applause had filled her with both pride and humility. But more than that, she understood the power of music itself. It was not simply about skill or fame. It was about connection, about touching hearts, about creating something that could transcend age, experience, and circumstance. And as she watched the audience, she realized that even if she did not play, she was part of that magic, part of the shared experience of emotion and beauty that music created. Yet the desire to play continued to grow. She found herself glancing at the piano again and again, her fingers twitching slightly as though they remembered the movement without her conscious thought. She imagined the feel of the keys beneath her hands, the sound of the notes resonating through the hall, the way the music could fill every corner of the room. She knew she could play, and she knew she could create something meaningful, something that might touch the hearts of those present in a way that words never could. At that moment, she felt a gentle nudge of courage. She remembered how in her younger years, music had given her strength when she had felt weak, hope when she had felt despair, and joy when she had felt burdened. She realized that perhaps it was time to embrace that part of herself again, even if only briefly. She could not ignore the call of the piano any longer. Even if the world seemed to say that she should remain in her seat, quiet and invisible. Her mind wandered to the stories she had heard of musicians who were recognized late in life, whose talent had gone unnoticed for years, only to shine brilliantly when the moment finally came. She thought about the countless people who had doubted her abilities when she was younger, who had said she was too old, too inexperienced, or simply not meant for the stage. And yet, those doubts had never diminished her love for music. They had not taken away the countless hours she had spent learning, practicing, and perfecting her craft. They had only made her more determined, more patient, more aware of the true power of music. She realized that she had a choice. She could remain in her seat, enjoying the music as a listener. Or she could step forward, take a risk, and share what had been locked inside her for so many years. The thought frightened her, but it also filled her with a quiet excitement. She had nothing to lose and perhaps everything to gain. She could feel the old thrill of performance building within her. It's a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that reminded her of her younger days. As the next performer finished, the hall erupted into applause. The nun remained seated, letting the sound wash over her, letting the energy of the room fill her. She felt a strange sense of alignment, as if everything had been leading to this night, to this moment, the quiet possibility of stepping back into the world of music. She remembered how she had once been praised, criticized, and encouraged, how she had learned to listen, to feel, and to respond to the music with her heart. And she realized that none of that experience had been wasted. It was all inside her, waiting, ready to be expressed once more. She looked at the piano again. Its polished surface gleamed in the light, the keys waiting silently, patiently. She imagined herself sitting there, hands poised above the keys, feeling the familiar texture under her fingers, hearing the first note resonate through the hall. She could feel the excitement, the anticipation, the nervous energy of the audience, and she knew she was ready. Not for recognition, not for applause, but simply to play, to connect, to express what had been inside her for so many years. The audience around her began to settle down for the next part of the program. Conversations hushed, glasses were set aside, and the performers prepared for their turn. She could hear the soft tuning of instruments, the subtle shifting of chairs, and the gentle murmur of anticipation. She took a deep breath, feeling her own heartbeat, feeling the quiet courage building inside her. She knew that if she wanted to play, she would have to act soon. The moment was fleeting, and opportunities like this rarely came twice. As she sat there, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the joys, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the love that had shaped her life. She thought about the people she had met, the lessons she had learned, and the experiences that had made her who she was. And she understood something deeply profound. Music was not bound by age, circumstance, or expectation. It was a part of her, and it could not be denied forever. She shifted slightly in her seat, feeling the familiar stirrings of excitement in her chest. She thought about the young performers on stage, the audience watching them, and the shared experience of emotion and beauty that music created. And she realized that she had a chance to contribute to that experience, to add her own voice, her own heart. To the collective story being told through sound, the next performer finished their piece, and the hall grew quiet once more. The nun could feel the moment approaching, subtle energy in the air that seemed to signal the possibility of something unexpected. She felt a gentle resolve building within her, a quiet determination to step forward, to embrace the part of herself that had been waiting so long to be expressed. She knew that the piano was calling her, and that she had the courage, the skill, and the heart to answer. She stood slowly, quietly, so as not to draw attention, and made her way toward the piano. Each step was deliberate, measured, yet filled with anticipation. She could feel the eyes of the audience, though many were distracted by other things. She could feel the energy of the room, the shared excitement, the subtle tension that always accompanies a performance. And she knew that when she finally sat down at the piano, everything would change. Not just for her, for everyone in the hall who would hear the music she was about to create. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. Trembling slightly with anticipation, she took a deep breath, feeling the familiar connection to the instrument. The way it had always responded to her touch, the way it had always allowed her to speak when words were not enough. And in that moment, she knew that she was ready. She was ready to reclaim a part of herself that had been waiting patiently, quietly, for decades. She was ready to play, to share, to connect, and to touch hearts in a way that only music could achieve. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, as the old nun prepared to make her first note. She could feel the history, the memories, the years of experience, all converging in that single moment. And she knew, with a quiet certainty, that the music she was about to create would not only be a reflection of her past, but a gift to everyone present. A reminder that talent, courage, and heart know no age or limit. The atmosphere in the hall had changed subtly. The performances earlier in the evening had gone well, but now a small tension had crept in. One of the scheduled pianists had not arrived. A ripple of concern ran through the organizers, and some audience members began whispering among themselves. The program had a rhythm, a flow, and missing a performer threatened to disrupt everything. The young volunteers moved quickly, exchanging nervous glances and hurrying behind the scenes. Chairs were shifted, people adjusted their positions, and the quiet hum of the audience became a little more noticeable. As if everyone was aware that something was amiss, the old nun, seated near the back, noticed the commotion. She watched the organizer speaking in hurried whispers, glancing toward the piano and then at the audience. She felt a quiet stirring inside her, a mix of curiosity, concern, and something deeper that she could not yet name. She had been sitting quietly, observing, lost in memories of music. But now the situation seemed to present an unexpected possibility. A young volunteer approached the piano, glancing nervously at the hall. "We need someone to fill in," he said softly to a colleague. "Does anyone here know how to play? Even a little?" The audience had started murmuring among themselves, some leaning forward in curiosity, others shrugging as if it did not matter to them. The old nun's heart began to beat a little faster. She felt a strange pull, a sense that this was the moment she had been waiting for. For a long time she had dismissed the idea of playing again, telling herself that she was too old, that she had chosen a different path, that this was just an evening to enjoy music. But now, with the piano waiting, the hall attentive, and the scheduled performer absent, she realized that she could step forward. She rose slowly from her seat, her hands folded in front of her, and walked toward the piano. Every step felt deliberate, every movement measured. Some people in the audience noticed her moving, others did not. There was a moment of hesitation, a brief pause in the collective attention of the room, as if everyone was sensing that something unusual was about to happen. She reached the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. The familiar texture that she had known all her life. A young volunteer looked at her with surprise. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "The piano is for scheduled performers." "Are you sure?" The nun nodded, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "I would like to try," she said softly, "just for a few minutes." There was a moment of uncertainty. The volunteer glanced toward the organizers, who were whispering among themselves. They could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet confidence, and after a brief pause, one of them nodded. "All right," he said. "You may play." The room seemed to hold its breath as she sat down at the piano bench. She adjusted her posture, her hands hovering just above the keys, feeling the familiar sensation that had been absent for so many years. The audience was quiet now, some leaning forward, others exchanging curious glances. No one expected mucha quiet nod to the effort, perhaps, or a polite acknowledgement of her attempt. Yet there was a subtle anticipation in the air, a sense that something beyond the ordinary was about to happen. She took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the hall, the shared expectation of the audience, and the weight of her own memories. She had not played in decades, but the music was still inside her, waiting, ready to flow once more. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the cold smoothness beneath her fingertips, and closed her eyes for a moment. Allowing herself to remember, her mind drifted back to her youth, to the long hours of practice, to the lessons learned from mistakes and triumphs alike. She remembered the way her fingers had moved almost instinctively, the way her heart had guided her hands, the way the music had always spoken more clearly than words ever could. She remembered the joy, the sorrow, the hope, and the quiet satisfaction that came from creating something beautiful from nothing. And now, sitting in the hall, she could feel that same connection returning. Stronger than she had imagined, she began to play. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a depth that immediately drew the attention of the audience. The hall seemed to quiet further, as if everyone sensed that this was not just an ordinary performance. The sound filled the room, warm and rich, resonating with a clarity that spoke of years of experience, practice, and passion. Her fingers moved with grace, each note deliberate, each chord expressive. Each movement filled with emotion. The audience was captivated. Conversations stopped, phones were lowered, and eyes turned toward the stage. People who had been distracted before now leaned forward, drawn in by the music. It was not just skill that impressed them, it was the heart behind it, the emotion, the story woven into every note. The old nun had not come to perform, yet she had already captured the attention and admiration of everyone present as she played. Memories flooded back more vividly than ever. She remembered the first time she had performed in front of a crowd, nervous excitement, the fear of making mistakes, the thrill of hearing applause. She remembered late nights practicing, the joy of mastering a difficult piece, and the quiet satisfaction of expressing her emotions through music. Now, all those experiences converged in her playing, creating a performance that was both powerful and tender, skilled yet heartfelt. The audience began to respond in subtle ways at first. A soft murmur of appreciation here, a quiet exhale of surprise there. Then, gradually, the response grew. People sat straighter in their chairs, eyes widening, faces reflecting astonishment and delight. Some could not help but smile. Others felt a tear well up, moved by the unexpected beauty of the performance. It was not just a piano recital, it was a story told through music. A lifetime of experience and emotion poured into each note. Her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, guided by years of memory and instinct. She played melodies that were familiar, yet fresh. Harmonies that resonated with the audience's hearts, rhythms that flowed naturally, carrying the listeners along with them. Every note seemed to speak, every chord seemed to tell a story. It was as if the music itself had taken on a life of its own, and the old nun was simply the instrument through which it was expressed. The audience could not look away. People whispered to each other, sharing their amazement in hushed tones. "Can you believe her age?" one whispered. "She plays as if she never stopped," another said. They leaned closer, trying to catch every nuance, every delicate movement, every subtle shift in expression. The hall, which had been filled with polite conversation and quiet background noise just moments before, was now completely absorbed in the music. The old nun played on, her eyes occasionally glancing at the audience, but mostly focused on the piano, on the keys, on the music itself. She had forgotten her nerves, forgotten the years of absence, forgotten the doubts that had whispered in her mind. In this moment, there was only the music, flowing through her hands and into the hearts of those listening. Each note was a testament to her passion, her discipline, her life, and her love for music. She remembered the people who had doubted her in the past, those who had said she was too old, too inexperienced, too quiet, too insignificant to matter. She thought about the years she had spent in service, the sacrifices she had made, and the moments when she had wondered if she would ever play again. And now, here she was, defying expectation, not for recognition, not for fame, but simply because music was a part of her, and it could not be denied. The room seemed to glow with the sound. The music filled every corner, touched every listener, and transformed the space into something magical. People leaned in, some with eyes closed, letting the melodies wash over them, letting the harmonies resonate with their own memories and emotions. Others watched in awe, captivated by the skill, the emotion, and the sheer unexpectedness of the performance. It was a reminder that talent has no age, that passion has no boundaries, that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unlikely sources. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. The old nun continued to play, each piece flowing naturally into the next, each note building on the one before. She felt the connection with the audience growing stronger, a silent conversation through music that needed no words. She felt the joy of creation, the thrill of expression, and the quiet satisfaction of sharing something deeply personal, yet universally understood. As the final notes approached, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath, waiting for the music to end. The old nun's fingers moved gracefully across the keys, slowing, softening, and finally resting on the last note. The silence that followed was immediate and complete, as if the entire hall were holding its collective breath in awe. Then, slowly, the first clap rang out. One by one, others joined, until the room was filled with applause, cheers, and expressions of amazement. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling broadly, all moved by the unexpected beauty they had just witnessed. The old nun sat quietly, a small, humble smile on her face, her hands resting gently on the keys. She had not come for this, yet the recognition was almost overwhelming, a testament to the power of music, courage, and the human spirit. She rose from the piano, bowed slightly to the audience, and returned to her seat. Feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment, she had played, she had shared her music, and she had touched hearts in a way that words could never achieve. The hall buzzed with admiration, astonishment, and joy, and she knew that this moment would linger in the memory of everyone present for a long time. In that moment, the old nun understood something profound. Music is not just about performance, skill, or recognition. It is about connection, about sharing a part of oneself with the world, about expressing what cannot be spoken. And she had done exactly that, quietly, humbly, yet powerfully, reminding everyone that talent, heart, and courage know no boundaries. The applause echoed through the hall, warm and thunderous. Yet the old nun remained seated at the piano for a few quiet moments, letting the sound wash over her. It was not for her own pride that she had played. She did not seek recognition, and she did not need it. Still, the warmth of the audience's response touched her deeply, stirring emotion she had long kept tucked away. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the energy of the room, the hearts of the people around her, and the strange, wonderful sense that her music had reached them in ways words never could. As the crowd's applause continued, she noticed subtle shifts in their behavior. People who had been chatting or glancing at their phones were now fully focused on her, on the music, on the story that her playing had told. She could see some people wiping tears from their eyes, others leaning forward, completely absorbed. There was a hush, a quiet reverence that settled over the room, as though they had realized that what they had just witnessed was more than a performance. It was a gift. Slowly, she rose from the piano bench, hands folded lightly in front of her. She gave a small, humble bow, acknowledging the audience without drawing attention to herself. Even as she returned to her seat, the applause did not wane. People were clapping, some standing, some leaning toward the stage, all of them moved by the unexpected depth of her music. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she had given something genuine, something that transcended age, circumstance, or expectation. The young volunteers and organizers looked on in awe. They had expected an ordinary performance, perhaps a polite attempt from an elderly guest. Instead, they had witnessed a masterful, heartfelt expression of a lifetime of practice, patience, and devotion. They whispered to each other, faces filled with astonishment. "Did you see that?" One murmured, She played like a professional." Others shook their head in disbelief. "I never imagined anyone could touch the piano like that," they said softly. The old nun sat quietly, feeling the energy of the audience, the warmth and admiration, and the subtle sense of connection that had formed between her and every person in the hall. She realized that the music had created a bridge between her life and theirs. A silent conversation carried through notes and chords. People did not need to know her story. They could feel it in the music itself, in the way she expressed joy, sorrow, hope, and courage. As the audience began to settle, murmuring softly to each other, she noticed something else. People who had seemed distant, distracted, or skeptical were now leaning closer, eager to see her, to understand who she was. Their expressions reflected a mix of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. They had come expecting a simple evening of music, yet they were witnessing something far more profound, a reminder that talent and passion can endure. Even in the quietest corners of life, waiting for the right moment to shine, she allowed herself a brief smile, feeling a quiet pride that was not about recognition but about fulfillment. Music had always been her companion, her voice when words were insufficient. And now, after years of silence, she had spoken again. She had shared her heart, and the response had been more than she could have imagined. It was a moment of pure connection, untainted by expectation, ambition, or vanity. The young performers who had played earlier began to approach her, faces filled with respect and wonder. One of them, a young woman holding her sheet music, spoke first. "That was incredible," she said softly, eyes wide. "I've never heard anything like it. How do you play with so much feeling?" The old nun smiled gently, her eyes kind and calm. "Music comes from the heart," she said softly. "The keys are just a way to share it. You do not need speed or power. You need to feel it, to live it." Another young musician, a boy who had been preparing nervously for his own performance, approached hesitantly. I've been trying for years to play like that," he admitted quietly. Do you have any advice?" She looked at him, considering her words carefully. "Practice is important," she said gently. "But more than that, patience and listening matter most. Listen to the music, not just the notes. Let it speak to you. Let it tell its story through you, not the other way around." The audience continued to murmur in astonishment. People were whispering to their neighbors, expressing disbelief that someone so elderly, so quiet, could possess such skill and heart. Some were taking out their phones to record the moment, others simply sat, absorbing every sound, every expression, every nuance of her performance. The hall had transformed from a simple venue for a charity event into a space of shared wonder and emotion. All sparked by the unexpected presence of a humble nun at the piano, she felt a quiet sense of humility. She had not sought to impress anyone, had not planned to take the stage, and had certainly not imagined receiving such attention. Yet the music had taken on a life of its own, connecting her to every person in the hall, bridging generations, and reminding everyone present that passion and dedication can transcend the ordinary. She realized that her years of study, practice, and patience had not been wasted. They had been waiting for this moment. For the right time to speak, people began to approach her during the intermission, asking questions, complimenting her playing, expressing how moved they had been. Some wanted to know her story. Some simply wanted to express gratitude for the experience she had provided. She answered softly, with quiet humility, acknowledging their words with gentle nods and kind smiles. She did not dwell on herself, did not seek attention, but allowed the focus to remain on the music, the shared experience, and the joy of connection the young volunteers watched. Still in awe, as the nun interacted with the audience, they had never seen anything like it. They realized that what had happened was more than just a performance. It was a lesson in courage, humility, and the enduring power of passion. One of the organizers whispered to another, "We thought she was just a guest. We never imagined." And they both shook their heads. Unable to find words that matched what they had witnessed, the nun herself felt a quiet satisfaction. She had returned to the piano after years of silence, shared her music, and touched the hearts of everyone present. She realized that the gift of music was not in applause, recognition, or fame. It was in the connection, in the way a note can reach across time, age, and circumstance to speak directly to someone's soul. And in that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace, a sense that she had fulfilled something she had carried within her for decades. The audience began to quiet again, as the organizers called everyone back to their seats for the next part of the program. There was an air of anticipation, a lingering sense of awe, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next after the unexpected brilliance they had just witnessed. People whispered to each other, sharing their amazement and admiration, and some even speculated about the nun's past, her training, and the life experiences that had allowed her to play with such depth and emotion. She returned to her seat near the back, hands folded in her lap, feeling the energy of the room and the quiet connection that had been formed. She did not need to look at the audience to feel that they had seen, they had heard, they had been moved. She could sense the lingering excitement, the whispered admiration, and the unspoken respect that filled the hall. It was more than she could have imagined, and yet she felt no pride, only a deep, quiet satisfaction that she had shared something genuine and lasting as the program continued. She listened to the other performers with renewed appreciation. The earlier excitement had given way to a heightened awareness of every note, every rhythm, every emotion conveyed. The audience was more attentive, more responsive. The atmosphere had shifted from polite expectation to genuine engagement. People had been reminded of the power of music, of courage, of passion, and of the quiet determination that can lead to extraordinary moments. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The years of practice, the sacrifices, the choices, the patience, and the dedication, all of it, had led to this night. She realized that life had a way of bringing moments together, of aligning circumstances in ways that could not be predicted. And sometimes, the quietest, most humble individuals could create the most profound impact. She had played not for recognition, not for applause, but because the music had been a part of her, and it could not be denied. The audience began to leave slowly as the next segment of the event concluded. But many remained, quietly talking about the nun's performance, expressing admiration and astonishment. Some lingered near the stage, hoping for another glimpse, another word, or simply to feel closer to the moment they had witnessed. The hall had been transformed, not just by her music, but by her courage, her humility, and the way she had shared a deeply personal gift without hesitation or expectation. She watched as people left, smiling softly, feeling a quiet fulfillment that had little to do with recognition. She had played, she had shared, she had connected, and she had reminded everyone present that true talent, passion, and courage can endure, even when hidden for decades. And in that quiet moment she felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had touched hearts, inspired minds, and reminded people that extraordinary moments can come from the most unexpected places. The hall was quiet now, but the energy of what had happened earlier lingered in the air. People moved slowly, some whispering to each other, still replaying the music in their minds, still feeling the warmth of the connection they had just experienced. The old nun sat near the back, hands resting in her lap, watching the crowd with a quiet sense of calm. She felt a strange mixture of relief and contentment. Relief because she had shared her music once again after so many years. And contentment because it had been received in the most genuine and heartfelt way possible. She thought about the path that had brought her here. Life had been full of choices, responsibilities, and sacrifices. There had been joy and sorrow, victories and losses, quiet moments of reflection, and years of dedication that had never felt fully acknowledged. And yet every step, every decision, every challenge had prepared her for this night. The music she had played had been a culmination of a lifetime of experiences, and it had reached the hearts of everyone present. That realization filled her with a deep sense of peace. Some audience members approached her cautiously, unsure if they should speak. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something unexpected, and they wanted to acknowledge it. One elderly man stepped forward, his eyes wide with admiration. "I've been attending events here for years," he said softly, "and I have never heard anything like that. Your playing, it was beyond words." The nun smiled gently, bowing her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly. "I did not play to impress. I only played to share what has always lived in my heart." A young woman, still holding her sheet music from earlier, approached next. I've never felt music like that before," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "How do you make it feel so alive?" The nun looked at her with kind, steady eyes. "Music is alive when it comes from the heart," she said simply. "It is not about perfect notes or speed. It is about feeling, understanding, and allowing the music to speak through you. When you play like that, it becomes more than sound, it becomes a connection." People continued to gather around her, some asking questions, others sharing their awe and admiration. She responded with quiet humility, never drawing attention to herself, never seeking praise. She simply shared what she could, listening carefully to each person, offering gentle guidance, and letting the conversation be about music, life, and the joy of expression. The young volunteers who had helped organize the event were especially moved. They had assumed the evening would be routine, a simple program with polite performances. Instead, they had witnessed a miracle of quiet courage and talent. One of them whispered to a colleague, She's extraordinary. I can't believe we almost missed this. The colleague nodded, unable to find words. Feeling the weight of what had just unfolded, the hall gradually emptied as the event came to a close. But many stayed longer than necessary, lingering near the piano or quietly reflecting in their seats. People discussed the nun's performance in low voices, sharing their impressions and marveling at the skill, emotion, and depth she had brought to the music. Some felt inspired to practice their own instruments more diligently. Some felt moved to revisit passions they had abandoned, and others simply sat in quiet awe, appreciating the beauty of what they had experienced. The nun observed it all with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had not sought this reaction, nor had she expected it, but it filled her heart nonetheless. She understood that her music had done more than entertain. It had reminded people of the power of patience, dedication, and the human spirit. It had shown them that age is not a barrier, that quiet individuals can make a profound impact, and that true talent often lies dormant, waiting for the right moment to be shared. As she prepared to leave, a few people approached to thank her personally. Some handed her small tokens of appreciation, a flower, a card, a warm handshake. She accepted each gift with grace and humility, acknowledging the gesture with a gentle smile. But her true reward was the knowledge that she had touched hearts and inspired minds. Each smile, each word of gratitude, each look of admiration was a reminder that music is not measured by recognition alone, but by its ability to connect people in ways that words often cannot.